Hey, good morning and welcome to Quarantine Cooking with Pastor Nick. Welcome to our show. On today's episode, you need a couple of things. You're gonna need coffee, whole bean. You'll need an egg and carrots. Now the tools we're using today is our slotted spoon, our regular spoon, and a pot. You'll need all these things on today's episode of Quarantine Cooking with Pastor Nick. All right, it's not really a cooking show, and I could definitely never do a cooking show, but it is time for our morning devotional. So good morning and welcome. Sometimes I think one of the hardest things for a pastor is to know what to say in any given situation. And that's in normal circumstances. I'm not even talking about circumstances such as when we're quarantined in our houses. You know, I try very hard to make sure that I'm relying on God, relying on the Spirit to know what I should bring to the table on any given Sunday, let alone a midweek devotional like we've been doing for the last number of weeks. There is something that I consistently see and hear that troubles my spirit, and the more that I've prayed about it and the more that I've thought about it, the more I think that it also troubles God's Spirit as well. And what that is some of the hate that seems to be going on right now. On any given day, whether it's on social media or it is in person or on a telephone call, it seems like I am confronted with people who claim to be God followers, people who love Jesus and love one another, but they're very willing to say really terrible things about one another. And so maybe that's the president. Maybe that's a president that you don't care for right now, and you're not happy with the job they're doing, or it's a governor that you're not happy with and you don't care for the job that they're doing. And yet somehow still as people who believe in God and who follow Jesus, who love Jesus, it seems like we have decided that it is okay for us to say things that are not edifying, that are not loving, that serve no purpose but to tear down and destroy. And that's problematic to me. It is troubling to my spirit. What becomes even more troubling, because I think it's easy for us to look at some of these politicians, political figures, celebrities as people who aren't quite human. We see them on a screen for the most part. I bet most of us who are watching this devotional have never talked to our president or our governor or some of the celebrities we look up to. And so they're almost like these not real people to us. But you know who are real people to us? Our brothers and sisters, our friends, our family, the people in our town and our community. And when we see people doing things that we don't agree with, whether that's sharing an opinion on social media or that is going out and doing protesting at the Capitol, again, I'm surprised and pained and troubled that we seem to think it's okay for us to say things that are only meant to tear down and destroy. Things like, I hope they get the virus. I know where they'll be in 2 weeks. These aren't things that are helpful. And I know that each of us have our own opinions on social media and what you should do with your page. It's my page, I can say what I want. You have freedom of speech, no one's going to take that away from you. However, we're still believers in Christ, and just because it's not in person doesn't mean that you aren't setting an example for the people around you. It doesn't mean that your kids or your grandkids aren't watching what you post and what you say online. And I think the thing that I really want to talk about today is social media. I'm surprised and a bit disappointed to see all that I've seen on social media. And know this too, if someone doesn't follow God, if they don't believe in Jesus, if they haven't said my life is a life devoted to the teachings and walking the path that Jesus walked, then I don't really have the same expectations for what they do or don't say, or what they do as an action or what they don't do. But for those of us who have said, yes, I follow Jesus, well, I think there's a different expectation for us. I want to read to you a little passage out of Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is doing the Sermon on the Mount, which is Some people think that this is kind of the best of compilation of all of the things that Jesus preached during his time on earth. They've kind of jammed it all together and made it into the Sermon on the Mount. It's kind of the things that he repeated. These are the things he taught again and again and again. Some people actually do think that this is, he sat kind of on the side of a mountain, of a hillside, and he gave this very long sermon to a big crowd of people. The truth of the matter is, this is what Jesus says, and this is what he calls us to. Matthew chapter 5, he says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the salt of the earth." Isn't that interesting? Now, I'm sure that you've heard many lessons on what it means to be the salt of the earth, and I'm probably not going to tell you anything new today. You know, salt gives flavor. That's the big thing. And it also preserves. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that one of the uses of salt, especially in biblical times, was preservation of food. But the big thing is flavor. Salt brings flavor. Now, you and I, friends, are the salt of the earth. We are bringing a flavor of sorts. The question has to be, what flavor are you bringing? I like how Matthew Henry is a theologian. He's long since passed away, but he wrote that this would encourage and support Christians in their suffering, that though they be treated poorly, they should really be blessings in the world, and the more suffering they go through, the more blessing they should be. I don't know if there's anything more challenging to hear today than that. The more suffering you go through, the more of a blessing you should be. That's what it means to be the salt of the earth. Despite how you feel that things are against you, they're stacked against you, that you're being treated poorly or treated unfairly, you're still meant to be a blessing. You're still meant to give a flavor out there. And if the salt loses its flavor, then what good is it? Because no one wants to put some kind of a spice on their food that gives it a bad flavor. And certainly, Jesus isn't telling us to be a people group that go out there and give a bad flavor to the world. We are meant to bring flavor. What kind of flavor are you bringing? I want to tell you a little story this morning about this young woman who comes home from college, comes home to her family's house, and she gets there real late at night, knocks on the door to be let in, or mom comes to the door in her bathrobe and lets her in, and they sit down in the kitchen, and it's an unexpected visit. And the young woman, the college student, she's just been having a real hard time with school, making the adjustment, making the leap. Classes are harder. She's struggling to make friends. It feels like the professors are against her. And she sits down with her mom, and she starts to talk with her about the suffering that she's going through, the obstacles that she's facing, the adversity that she's in. And so as she's talking, as she's kind of sharing story after story and problem after problem, her mom walks over to the stove, and she picks up 3 pots from underneath the stove, and she puts an egg in the first pot of water, and then she puts coffee beans in the next pot of water, and she puts a carrot in the last pot of water. And she sets them all to boil on the various burners, and she sits back down and starts asking her daughter questions, and she starts to listen to what her daughter's saying, the stories that she's sharing, and all the while the food on the stove, the egg, the carrots, and the coffee beans are boiling in this water. Well, the daughter kind of gets out everything she's getting out. She's got tears coming down her eyes. She's just feeling backed up against a wall. And the mom kind of senses that they're at a lull in the conversation, so she walks over to the stove and she turns off the burners, and she gets the egg out of the boiling water. She gets the carrot out of the boiling water, and then she pulls the coffee beans out of the boiling water, and she pours the water from the coffee bean pot into a bowl. She puts the bowl in front of the daughter. She puts the carrot in front of the daughter. She puts the egg in front of the daughter, and she says, "Now tell me what you see." And the daughter says, "Well, I see an egg, a carrot, and coffee." Mom says, yeah. She's like, well, why don't you touch them? They're cooled down now. Why don't you touch them? Tell me what you feel. And she looks at the egg and she puts it in her hand and she crumbles the shell, and she can see that the shell is now able to flake off, and the inside of the egg, it's no longer runny, it's now hardened. It's hard boiled. She puts it back down and she picks up the carrot. And the carrot, which when it went into the water was firm, it was crisp, it was cool. If you snapped it, it would break with a crisp sound. And now she picks it up and it just kind of mushes in her hand. And she goes over to the bowl and she looks at the bowl and she sees the coffee in there. She sees the steam rising from the coffee. It smells like coffee, brings back so many childhood memories. And she kind of shares these observations with her mother. She says, but Mom, what's the point? And her mom says, look, you have a choice to make. Each of these things, the egg, the carrot, and the coffee beans, they all face the same adversity, boiling water. And each of them had a different reaction. The egg got hardened. And for some of us, when we face adversity, we end up getting hard-hearted. Our insides, they get hard. The carrot started out as hard and crisp and cool, and it became soft and mushy. It kind of fell apart, if you will. And I know it's really easy for many of us when we face adversity to also fall apart. But the coffee beans are a different story. The coffee beans went into the water and they didn't really change too much. They got a little darker in color, but what the coffee beans end up doing is flavoring the whole water around them. And so when the water comes out of the pot, it's actually not just water anymore. Now it's coffee. The coffee beans change the environment that the adversity was in. Friends, you and I have a choice. We're in a time of adversity right now. How are you going to act? How are you going to react? What kind of flavor are you going to put out into the world? You can reflavor the entire environment with something that tastes good, smells good, brings back some good memories like coffee. Or you can be some sort of a bitter spice and flavor the world with that. And I don't want to oversimplify this, by no means. I don't know many people that aren't hurting in this time. But if Jesus meant for us to recognize this verse as being the salt of the world as something of an encouragement, if he meant for us to be a blessing to the world, even in the midst of adversity, if he meant that the more suffering and the more adversity that we face, the more we are a blessing to the world, then it's time we ask ourselves the question, when we look back on this time, are we going to be proud of how we acted? Will we have honored Jesus and Jesus' command for us during this time? I know that might be a bit of a harder message this morning, but I pray that it finds you well and that it encourages you to live in a way that is a blessing to those around you. Have a good day.